So I think an example of where that's going to get exciting next, a lot of companies in robotic supply chains are priced according to automotive multiples and where automotive is in the cycle. If they get re-rated for growth into robotics in the years to come, you're actually, well, people think, oh, I need to buy AI. It's something that could drop 90%. There's a lot of companies with relatively limited downside and basically a free call option to the upside. So that's what's exciting.
Yeah.
A lot of people think investing in something like AI just means distribution of either lose all your money or get a 10x. You can play this trend in so many ways
Yeah.
right now that I think
Yeah.
people overlook. It's exciting.
Hello and welcome to Stock Club. Regular listeners will recall that last week I unveiled an event called Investicon, which is a very special event that we're running on the floor of the Irish Stock Exchange on the day of Thursday, August 21st. We're assembling an array of investing masters in several areas: stocks, whiskey, AI, and to a lesser extent, ETFs. And we're extracting their top 3 investing ideas for 2026 and beyond. So this week, I have the great pleasure of interviewing my friend Eric Bleeker, who's flying into Dublin this August as one of our expert guests, specifically in the area of AI, which is to me today what the internet was in the mid 1990s. About 2 years ago, or possibly less, I did not think that we would witness a technology with a larger mass market impact than the World Wide Web. But here we are, AI sits on top of that web, and with it, a technology that is literally going to change everything. And I know just the man to help us find the next Amazon, Meta, or Netflix equivalent of AI. So no pressure, and welcome, Eric, to Stock Club.
Hey, thanks for having me, Emmett.
Eric, before we dive in, tell me this. If you had to describe your investing style in a sentence or two, what would it be?
Yeah, I've been following technology almost exclusively for 20 years. So it's really trend focused. And my core thesis is that what a lot of people initially describe as a bubble is just underestimating exponential growth. So when you
Mm.
can discover true compounding, people tend to underestimate. And that's led to some of the returns we see in categories like the Magnificent Seven stocks you just teed up. So I would say that's as concise as I can get.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine says that a bubble is a rally that you missed. So I guess when I think about it, I've often looked at AI because we've joked and lampooned on our podcast in the past how every quarterly call seemed to bring AI into the conversation. Most notably for us, Sherwin-Williams paint guys were on about AI, and we're like, "Come on, please! A brush still has to go into a pot and it has to get rubbed on the wall." But when I think about bubbles, I have to, I guess, at the top of the show, ask you: are we in an AI bubble, or the earliest days of a mega trend? Or even just to put that question slightly differently, do you think there's a reasonable risk that we're going to endure an equivalent to the dot-com bubble that clears out a whole load of pretenders the way the year 2000 did in the internet equivalent?
Yeah, I think, if you think about the internet itself, was it a bubble or was it world changing? Both things can be true.
Yeah.
And we'll probably see something pretty similar with AI. We already saw a little bit of what you're talking about this year, post DeepSeek, and then into kind of the geopolitical issues with tariffs. A lot of these leading stocks sold off 50, 60% or more. What I would say is, my belief is we're going to be up and to the right over the long term, but we're certainly going to see periods of manias and also kind of troughs of disillusionment along the way.
Mm.
Where I think you're going to see a lot of overinvestment is right now, there is a huge fear of missing out, or FOMO, specifically around building these models that increasingly cost. I mean, the spend on capital expenditure this year is going to be $300 billion or in that neighborhood. And we will eventually have to see a shakeout because not everyone can keep running this race. So,
Mm.
in that primary spending vector, I think we will whittle down to a select group of companies, maybe two or three on the consumer side, maybe three or four on the enterprise side. What I think too is that, though, well, there is this kind of high likelihood we're going to see kind of waves in this overall upwards trajectory, though. If you're an investor, and even if you are mostly in Sherwin Williams or other stocks, it's really hard to ignore
AI pure
AI.
play, I should say. AI pure play paint.
AI pure play Sherwin Williams. It's just there's so many types of growth for every kind of investor. You look at how AI is going to transform many of the blue chips of the 21st century, like Amazon, and it's central to the thesis and
Mhm.
how it entrenches their competitive moat. I think it will be central to a lot of stocks in really divergent industries. So if you're ignoring this, ignore at your own peril, because, as you noted, eventually every company became some form of an internet company, whether that's distribution or how you build your internal systems. And we will see something just as powerful with AI. So I think every investor, even if you're not investing in the purest of pure plays, like a Sherwin Williams,
Mm.
it's going to impact your portfolio.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so you've been at this, you've been in the center of the stock investing world for, say, 20 years. I think you started in the Motley Fool, is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah,
Right.
that's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So you've kind of seen the post.com survivors, and you've tracked and followed the greatest businesses from that point forward. But what you just said that's of particular interest to me is you right now only see a handful of consumer and, as it were, B2B AI pure play companies. Is that correct?
Well, it's a I would say it's a far more interesting space
Mm,
than a lot of people look at. Let's talk about, a lot of people ask, where are we seeing the impacts of AI? Where is this taking off? You could start with a field that's near and dear to so many people. Almost everyone uses social media,
for
and you
sure.
look at how it's transformed advertising the past 2 years. It's no coincidence that if you look at Meta's stock chart, the absolute bottom where it hit like $80 a share, that was within weeks of ChatGPT's release. And now Meta's at $700.
Yeah.
And last year, the figure is that Meta saw about an incremental $16 billion thanks to AI, which is almost two-thirds of its profitability. So it was
Mm,
truly a rebound. And
mm,
if you want to beat Nvidia the past few years, there's one real stock that trounced it. There's a company named AppLovin. Hilarious name, hilariously big profits, and it's up 40 fold. And it's just because AI really it's hit an inflection point recently in the trajectory of how quickly it's progressing. And advertising is just one of the fields that this trajectory was felt first, and the companies that adopted first have seen profits that followed. So, well, a lot of people say, where are the use cases? Where's the money flowing? One of the things that most people touch every day, like advertising, has actually seen one of the biggest upticks in profitability thanks to this. So I think, well, a lot of people focus only on an idea like Nvidia. There's so many areas that underneath the surface are seeing kind of transformative results.
And when you say advertising, just help me here a little bit. Do you mean like the trade desk, for example, is using far more powerful algos to make sure that the right ads appear to the right folks? Is that what you mean?
Correct. Yeah. So an app loving would have embraced this in their advertising technology earlier. And like a Facebook, you're talking about a lot more creative tools for the advertisers themselves. And you're talking about more engagement on the
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah.
Thanks to AI, they're getting 10 or 15% more dwell time on their applications. And when you're at that scale, you think about
Yeah.
Amazon getting 2 to 3% more profitability flowing down to their bottom line thanks to intelligent use of robotics. At the scale they're at, that's 20, $30 billion in profitability a year.
Mm. Oh, yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable. And I
Hmm.
think with technology, I really believe that it never really takes flight until the majority of people see it in action and can actually feel its benefit. For some people, they're now opening, whether it's Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook. I don't know if anyone even uses Facebook anymore. And they see the new Meta little circle there, and they tap on it and realize there's an AI assistant there. Or indeed, if they're using Gmail, and they have the assistant there to help you write your emails. When Apple start to push their version out properly, and we're kind of our friend Siri, she improves vastly. I think when that's touching everyone's life with like an unmissable benefit, I think that's when the majority of investors' wallets are going to open and start really going in force towards what are regarded as an AI investment. But that's there to be seen. You can kind of choose the businesses and you can see the Nvidias of the world, and the story is there for everyone to observe. But are there any AI adjacent companies that are being overlooked right now because they don't have AI in their name or their pitch deck? And I'm giggling because you're not allowed to say Sherwin Williams. That's my pick. Like, so,
You
like,
know,
what company out there to your eye is doing something in AI that's pretty nifty? And by the way, I should really just tell our listeners that it's very relevant that you have a podcast called the AI Investor Podcast, and it centers on obviously AI and its implications for investors. And I think what the pod provides me and your expertise provides to me is accessible discussions on topics from the major AI players such as Meta and Microsoft and Amazon, to AI powered robotics, and then ultimately what we're here to discuss, which is potential investments in smaller and possibly lesser known companies in the AI sector. So you are an expert in this in every way possible. And the person who recommended I speak to you, when I said to them, we need the best at AI, your name came off their lips instantly. And when I listened to all your past podcasts, I realized you're the right man, which is quite a long intro to a short question, which is what companies. So I'm pre-qualifying that your answer has probably got more weight to it than mine. What companies other than Sherwin Williams are doing AI beautifully, but they aren't there to be seen?
yeah, we had just discussed that um, ad place question of how this bubbles underneath the surface. I think you're really going to see a recalibration of entire industries like semiconductors, for example. And we could go into the weeds and picks and shovels plays, but you start with a company like Nvidia. There's hundreds of companies whose business is being reoriented, whether or not they have exposure to new categories that are going to get spending. And some of these companies haven't necessarily been repriced. So I think if an investor looks at a stock chart like Nvidia and says, I've missed this, I don't think that's the case because we've really seen a lot of networking stocks take off. AI requires entirely new forms of networking where you have hundreds of thousands of chips that all need to be working together at once. That
Mm.
creates fundamentally new demands. There's a tiny company that I've been kind of interested in named Hymax, and they do the kinds of boring drudgery that no one wants to hear about in semiconductors, where they're doing things like drivers for TV sets, but they're priced like that old industry, and they're about to hit mass production of a new technology that's essential to AI next year called co-packaged optics. And the market's not really pricing for that growth. And when that growth becomes a reality, we see a takeoff, like you saw in an AI stock like Palantir. It's the number one stock in the market the past year. I think it's up
Yeah,
600%.
yeah,
And it's because AI basically took the growth rate from 20 to 35. So, if you can get ahead of the trend before, it doesn't mean that company needs to take its growth rate from 20 to 100%. The market often begins repricing stocks significantly before then. So I would say another kind of area to look at if investors are saying, well, what's the next area that might be kind of repriced from AI that's kind of under the radar? I think you definitely want to look at software, and that's where we've been focusing a lot of our attention recently on the AI Investor podcast.
mm,
Software is going to be challenging. You've heard about software. If you look at charts of the amount of code commits, it's going up exponentially because AI makes coding, it enhances it so much. But the other side is that there's some software that really lends itself to kind of this AI era is going to be able to tack on a lot of features, especially for agentic AI. Snowflake is a company I've been has been one of my favorite plays on this because you start as a core data platform, and they've been very intelligent about how they're buying companies, how they're adding additional product features. And you might just see Snowflake accelerate from a 25% product growth. And thanks to AI, it could be hitting that 35, 40, kind of that repeat of Palantir. And if it does that, I'm very confident it's going to be a winner in the years ahead. So I think
Mm.
we've seen this play out in the processors Nvidia. We've kind of seen data center stuff. A lot of it really take off. The next wave is going to be which software is really built to see that inflection point of revenue. And if you can still have that, I think there's still a lot of profits to be made. But Emmett, the underline is, yeah, there's a lot of pretenders.
There are. That was absolutely fascinating. The first thing is, as you were describing Hymax, which is a company I actually had not heard of, as you described what it's doing, it's almost like the storyboard of Nvidia. This invisible GPU maker for PlayStations became the biggest name in business.
Mhm,
And I mean, I don't want to grab a too obvious analogy from the biggest winner in the world of AI so far, but it certainly sounds to me like that company is one to keep an eye on from an emerging technology that the average Joe on the street uh, has not encountered or heard of. When you talk about
mhm.
Snowflake, I get this pang of, oh no, did I do it again? Because what I mean by that is all of my greatest mistakes in my 30-year investing life have been related to cells. And
Mhm.
I bought Snowflake for the Horizon portfolio, so the service I run for MyWallSt, and I sold it because I got spooked by a sequence of events. I don't sell when I get spooked on one thing. I need to be spooked for for quite a few months, and I can't recall the entire reason set that I sold Snowflake, but I can tell you in that short description, I have just dragged it from sold into inbox on my Trello board for stock research for Horizon because nothing can no rules saying I can't rebuy it. So are you buy hold or sell on Snowflake today?
Oh, I'm by. That's a stock in the AI investor podcast. We manage $500,000 of money just to show investors
Hmm,
what I'm buying. That's one that we've added. I personally own inc- incrementally more than is in that podcast. So that's been one of my favorite software ideas.
nice,
And
nice.
I'm looking to add. I would love to own a core holding of 5 to 10 software companies in addition to semiconductors, networking, and then other kind of adjacent plays into AI as an overall strategy.
One of the things that struck me in recent times is that it's so on trend for businesses to bring AI into the conversation. There is a lot of hype and BS and hot air coming from businesses. So there are businesses that are doing real AI properly, and I suppose even at one extreme, pure AI, and then there's
Mhm.
those who I don't keep saying Sherwin Williams. They might have some amazing LLM in there, but like there's those that are talking the game, but that's all they're doing. Do you have a good bullshit detector for for AI conversations? Can you separate real innovation from hype?
Yeah, how would you separate? Number one, I would say if a company's putting AI on its name, suspect that it's not a real AI
C3
company.
AI.
C3AI is the funniest stock. I mean, it was founded, I think, as a climate change stock, which is why it's C3. It was like climate,
Oh yeah.
carbon, and something.
Okay.
And then they pivoted to Internet of Things, and then they pivoted to renaming it C3AI, which shows how you go through these hype cycles, right? I think you should always be suspicious when there's a company that is hoping that AI is going to be impacting its core business, but it still might be 4 or 5 years out. That the classic Sherwin. Every single company in retail or other kind of these next step categories is going to want to talk about AI on their conference calls. You can the most beautiful looking chart in the world
Mm.
is the references to AI in corporate conference calls. It's just beautiful. If you could find a stock like that, you'd be
Yeah.
set for life.
Yeah.
But software is going to be difficult because I was talking about these software winners. I also think this is a category that's going to have to shake out a little bit. In 2021, everyone wanted SaaS because it was the best business model in the world. AI is going to challenge a lot of assumptions around seat licenses and other ideas because in AI world, you might have this agentic workflow of kind of autonomous kind of AI workers doing, you know, workflow in companies, and how does that work in kind of a seat license and SaaS world,
Mm.
and kind of a lot of SaaS has been predicated on too many companies trying to flood verticals, and it might actually shake a lot of them out. So when I look at companies, especially in areas like semiconductors, which is a category I spend a lot of time in, I'm always looking at, everyone's talking about AI opportunities, but what's your actual, are you going to define your revenue contribution from AI?
Mm.
And what percent of it's incremental? Because a lot of companies want to talk about AI, but while you grow in AI in some categories, you're losing in others.
Yeah.
Well, well, you're if you're a server company, you have to be doing the right kinds of servers, because your traditional servers that
Yeah.
we had that were very CPU centric, the growth rates are plummeting.
Hmm.
So if you've got 60% exposure to that and 40% exposure to AI, it might not net out ahead.
Mm.
So you really need to go into the details and see what is the true incremental growth. And I love it too when sometimes, as just example, I was very interested early last year in a lot of the optics plays, because what I was seeing was a lot of companies priced along a telecom cycle. Telecom's not super exciting. They don't have a lot of slack to make capital expenditures. But if you can buy a company at trough in valuation on a past idea that's going to get re-rated for a new idea, because they're going to go from being dependent on these data center or telecom cycles to all of a sudden building out these data centers,
Mm.
you have the recipe for extreme growth. So I think an example of where that's going to get exciting next, a lot of companies in robotic supply chains are priced according to automotive multiples and where automotive is in the cycle. If they get re-rated for growth into robotics in the years to come, you're actually, well, people think, oh, I need to buy AI. It's something that could drop 90%. There's a lot of companies with relatively limited downside and basically a free call option to the upside. So that's what's exciting.
Yeah.
A lot of people think investing in something like AI just means high distribution of either lose all your money or get a 10x. You can play this trend in so many ways
Yeah.
right now that I think
Yeah.
people overlook. It's exciting.
It is very exciting. I completely agree. It feels like the real deal. And what I mean by that is after the dot-com rush and we saw there was pretenders and there were real princesses like Amazon, along came other hot trends. You've touched on some of them. So there was a SPAC gold rush, and then the blockchain was another. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if you weren't talking about the blockchain or some crypto that sat on top of it, you were kind of like your granddad. But with AI, this is the real thing. This is not another just flash in the pan that we all have to get excited about and then very soon lose interest in when the tide goes out, and to use the Warren Buffett analogy, we see who has no pants on, which for some of those gold rushes was everybody. But I fully agree with you, and I believe we're very privileged to be investors in the year 2025, because it is like we're after getting in a time machine and going back to 1999 or 1998, where it was the birth of the internet. And yes, there are going to be some giant winners and a whole load of losers, but those winners, if we find just one of them and hold them over the next 20 years, will have face melting wealth, like death defying, augmenting wealth. But out there are kind of pick and shovel plays. You mentioned this a little bit earlier on. There's this kind of like there's dead center businesses that are rightly or wrongly going pure play AI, whether we talk about Lemonade or Upstart or C3 AI or all these different businesses or Palantir. Some are doing AI pure play and doing it well. Others are just talking about it. But tell me about the pick and shovels of
Yeah.
AI. Who out there is enabling the industry, and that it doesn't really matter if one tech outdoes the other. Ultimately, they are going to win. And for listeners unfamiliar with the term, I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar. It comes from the gold rush in San Francisco in whatever it was 1849, where the individuals who are selling picks and shovels to gold prospectors and miners made as much money as the gold prospectors, because it didn't matter where they went looking for gold. They were selling the picks and shovels. So who are the pick and shovelers of AI?
Yeah, I think, once again, it's often surprising to people how many ways you can look to play the trend when, a lot of people struggle to come up with ideas or the media focuses on a narrow group of stocks. You could look at Nvidia.
Mm,
Um, Obviously, they're a key enabling layer to the future of AI, but they have competition. And if you are a big hyperscaler or these national entities building out these data centers, the number one thing you want is a level of competition. And if NVIDIA is your Apple with a highly integrated solution, well, Broadcom is rapidly becoming the Windows, where they essentially build custom AI processors. They also control a lot of networking technology that's very valuable. And a lot of companies are going to Broadcom because they don't want to become entirely reliant on
mm,
NVIDIA. So that's a
mm.
very interesting pick.
Yeah.
You have the kind of networking layer I've talked about a lot on this show, where you go from designing data centers where they didn't need to be so, the connectivity demands were a lot less than they are today. That's putting a lot more demand in areas like the fastest networking technologies. One company I love from this is Fabrinet, which has been called kind of the Taiwan semiconductor of designing, optics plays. And we're about to see a lot of innovation in this space. I think they're a company that kind of wins no matter where the technology goes in the years ahead. And they're a stock I would be happy to buy and hold for 10 years.
Wow.
And then you look at data centers. Okay, you got to buy the land, you got to buy the chips, but there's a huge component of how you power data centers, how you're basically building out all the basic infrastructure. So you could go to things like gas turbines. GE Vernova is one of the most interesting areas. You can look at liquid cooling with a company like Vertiv, or you can even go to the power companies that are most advantaged from this trend. A lot of people have been buying different power plays like Constellation Energy that are uniquely positioned to see their profits scale as AI takes off. And you go even one level deeper, a lot of people have been looking at things like which rare earth metal companies are going to
Mm,
benefit the most from the growth of AI. So you can take it all the way from kind of resources in the ground to power companies to building the power infrastructure to the chips. And hey, if you didn't even want to buy between Broadcom and Nvidia, you could always buy Taiwan
for
Semiconductor,
sure.
a company with a monopoly and incredible growth rates. You can buy the semiconductor equipment companies. So to your point, there's never been so many options for picks and shovels in a trend before, and that's what makes this truly exciting.
And you didn't mention nuclear. If Mike was sitting here beside me, he'd say, "Oh, ask him about nuclear," because Mike has made some very compelling arguments for nuclear being the solution to powering, well, everything. So you spoke about Constellation Power. I
Mhm.
presume they have nuclear in their arsenal. Is that correct?
I mean, a lot of these companies have, especially in Texas,
Yeah,
gas as a primary,
yeah, yeah,
energy source. I nuclear nuclear is interesting to me. You can only be an expert in so
yeah,
much,
for
right? And
sure.
you
No,
need to
that
be
is a
aware of it.
it's its own thing. But at the very at the 40,000 foot level, do you see nuclear as being one of the adjacent plays?
I do see it being, obviously it's a key beneficiary. That the core concept is we have incredible energy needs between markets. Where a lot of this, data centers are coming online is primarily America because it has cheaper energy. You also need to situate some closer to customers where you get some in Europe. We're starting to get sovereign build outs in areas like the Middle East.
Yeah,
Um, but you need that power. The problem with nuclear is the costs are all front loaded. The other problem is that a lot of the cost, steel and concrete and labor, they don't have a scaling law, whereas other emerging power sources like solar and batteries have had a scaling law. So you look at like a Google, that they're targeting small modular nuclear reactors, and those would first come online in 2030 in an optimistic scenario. All those other competing technologies with scaling laws will have seen incredible advances by then. They're not standing in place. Well, the cost for nuclear might be kind of increasing with time. So I love nuclear
mm,
on paper.
mhm.
It's just it's always faced so many permitting issues, so many battles. In a perfect world, nuclear is the ideal solution. I do just worry that some of the primary stocks that investors are looking at for nuclear, like an Oklo, I think that was up like 125% last month. And it's basically all on hopes and dreams for the futures. So it's it's not an area I've actively taken a bet against. It's just one that I've researched, taken that 40,000 foot view you mentioned, and I said, I'm going to personally stay away from this and look for other opportunities. But
I hear
I
you.
get it. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
there's a lot of complications to it.
And I think you're right. I mean, when you look at concentric circles out from the center point, which is AI, it feels like it's a few layers out. So I just want to remind our listeners that we are running an event called Investicon, the very first of its type in the country, and we hope to grow it to something of scale and significance. We're running it in strategic partnership with the Aer Lingus College Classic, which is an American football game, which this year is Kansas State University versus Iowa State University, aka Farmageddon. I think one of the states does potatoes and the other does corn. Is that right, Eric? I mean, not to put you on.
My wife went to Iowa State, so I will not besmirch their good name. But
No,
yeah,
okay,
lots
good.
of corn
Well,
production.
so we have the great pleasure of Eric is joining us in Investicon on Thursday, 21st of August. We're starting this event. We're kicking off the event in the Irish Stock Exchange, which is a small but absolutely stunningly beautiful historic location, 100 seats only. Early bird tickets are for sale on investicon.ie. Go grab your ticket now because Eric is going to give us his three favorite investments in the space, AI space, on the day. And Eric, I don't want you to answer this question with specifics because we got to save the best conversation for Investicon. But do you already know the names of the three AI related companies that you'd buy and hold today if you're heading to a desert island for the next 20 years?
Yeah, I've started thinking about what I'm going to present at Investicon, and one of the key areas I think is so exciting is a lot of people think AI has been this kind of uniform trajectory where it just starts in around 2010 and it's been rising. The
Yeah.
reality is not that. You can go back, you can search my name. I've got articles saying Nvidia is my favorite buy in the market in late 2009 due to AI. I really got reinterested in the category thanks to another visit with Nvidia in 2015. I've seen it all. There were breakthroughs such as deep learning in the past. I want to talk about how AI has seen cycles that really reaccelerate growth and why we're at the beginning of one right now that I think is going to create a new category of winners. So, I think right now the market isn't cheap, but also a lot of leading categories in AI, as I've talked about today, aren't wholly expensive either. So if you
Yeah.
come to this presentation, you're going to get a real pitch on the biggest trends. You're going to get actionable recommendations. That kind of research of getting all these stocks, it's not just me, it's a lot of presentations, cost hundreds of dollars. But if you're in Dublin, if it's a drive, it's a flight, if you're traveling to the kickoff challenge, hopefully for Iowa State, I might be wearing some red that weekend. If you come to Investicon, if you see my presentation, you can talk to me afterwards. I'd love to talk to people. And like I said, you're going to get presentations, you're going to get actionable ideas. And, I want to talk about what my favorite software ideas today. Nvidia, it got lucky, as you said. They they were making chips for video games and the right market came to them. They saw explosive growth. I think there's a software company today that has the single best tailwinds from AI. I'm going to talk about why on that. I'm going to talk about my favorite semiconductor stock that I think is getting a tailwind. And I'm going to give investors kind of a way to play this trend, regardless of what your risk tolerance is as well. So I think no matter who you are as an investor, like I said, if it's a drive, if it's a flight, it's going to be a blast. It's on the, Dublin stock market. Emmett, I'm excited. I've loved talking with you. I'm sure everyone's going to love talking with everyone else there. So I think just,
I
look
can't
into it
better
right now.
that. I
Go
can't
talk to
better.
people.
Eric, I have one very short last question for you.
Sure.
You're going to be speaking in the historic financial venue in the heart of Dublin, world capital of pubs and live music, 2 days before a massive football clash in summer. Was it a tough decision to come over?
I will say I have whiskey collection I probably need a special insurance policy for.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah,
Well, you're
it's
going to
pretty
enjoy the other
expensive.
part of the show because we've the two probably world deep most preeminent experts in whiskey in the world on collectible whiskey at Investicon. One is going to be talking what barrels to buy. The other is going to be talking about what bottles to buy. And maybe you can talk about what bottles you're going to drink.
I love it. I mean, like I said, it was not a hard sell.
Well,
You
I'm
know,
delighted because it's a real honor to have you over. And that was a fascinating conversation. More chat to come. Hop on to investicon.ie, folks, and we'll see you in August. Eric, thank you so much for joining me here today.
yeah, thanks, Emmett.